This program, while curated to help you improve your health, contains general advice and should not replace the individual advice of your medical practitioner.
If the American Heart Association said it, ignore it.
Because it's their right to give their kids sugar.
It is not health care. It's crisis care.
We are here to teach these people how to not need us.
There is more going on behind the scenes than we could possibly fathom.
And it's looking at it is, what is the point of living an extra 15 or 20 years when you don't have quality of life?
Well, we can change that.
In life, it's normal to have ups and downs. But what do we do when we get stuck? I've always been fascinated by the health journey. Why do some people get better while others fail to make the shift? In Season 1 of The Shift, we explore the fascinating field of gut health and help you discover what is really going on with your digestion, microbiome and health.
The gut is amazing.
Changes our concept of the human body.
Become useless to the healthcare system.
We're always shifting. Your genes are shifting, your microbes are shifting, everything is shifting.
I'm Katherine Maslen, and this is The Shift. In the last episode, we examined the do's and don'ts of eating for gut health. We discovered that gluten and dairy can significantly impact our health and contribute to disease. Wheat and dairy are two of the foods that dietitians and government bodies have been recommending we consume daily. So you might be wondering, why have we been told to consume something that the science has proved to be bad for us for so long? In this episode, we're going to examine the deep dysfunction in our food and healthcare systems that has led us down a path that has significantly increased our risk of chronic disease. Let's begin by revisiting something that Rodney Dietert from Cornell University said about the epidemic increases that we've had in chronic disease and how this plays out for our life expectancy to highlight where we're at right now.
You just look at the epidemic increases, it's very discouraging. And while countries eating westernized diets and westernized countries have led the way in that epidemic, the CDC recently estimated that almost 3/4 of all deaths worldwide are due to NCDs, not due to infectious diseases, actually. You know, our life expectancy is up, but that's because we're living life sick. We're living life dependent on drugs and doctor's visits, and in some cases, increasing needs of caregivers.
And it's looking at it is, what is the point of living an extra 15 or 20 years when you don't have quality of life?
Well, we can change that.
You probably remember the food pyramid. It was a mainstay when I was growing up. It was that triangle with all of the grains at the bottom and the saturated fats up the top. It was widely advertised on TV and recommended by all mainstream health practitioners. It wasn't until I got to the nutrition subjects of my naturopathy degree some 16 years ago that I realised that this might not be the best way to eat for health. Steph Lowe is a wonderful nutritionist and author from Melbourne, Australia. I wanted to hear what she had to say on the topic.
The food pyramid's interesting because when I was studying nutrition, it was very grain heavy. So it was the 6 to 11 serves of whole grains per day. The bulk of our plate was coming from grains and cereals, and we were definitely demonising fats. You know, even the olive oils were at the top of the food pyramid in the tiny triangle, and we're told to limit fats and limit our salt intake. 2015 saw the new food pyramid released by Nutrition Australia, which was an amazing step in the right direction because plants were being celebrated over grains. So we're seeing the encouragement to eat vegetables. I think it's a positive step in the right direction, but I still don't think it's quite right. We wouldn't have the health issues that we see in the West if we were giving guidelines that created longevity. You know, these lifestyle diseases like type 2 diabetes are not accidental. They are a direct result of the guidelines that we've been fed for the last 5 decades. They are avoidable, and type 2 is reversible with a low carbohydrate, healthy fat diet. And if you don't know that, I think that's really important to understand, because otherwise you're looking down the barrel of a progressive disease that's medication only rather than taking the power in your own hands and reversing the lifestyle disease with real food.
There have been several other interventions installed by the Dietetics Association over the years, with the most recent in Australia being the Health Star rating. Interestingly, when I looked into the Health Star rating when it was released, I found that contributors included the Australian Beverage Council, which represents non-alcoholic drinks like soda and other sweetened beverages, and the Australian Food and Grocery Council that represents packaged food. So the question we need to ask is, why do the very industries that sell products that cause chronic disease have any say whatsoever in an initiative that is supposed to be making people healthier? Here's Steph again.
The Health Star rating it's irrelevant. It doesn't mean anything, unfortunately. There's a lot of, conversation around who's paying for how many stars. It is still based off the very archaic research. So you'll see a low-fat product that might be packed full of sugar, like a cereal, for example, with 3.5, 4 or 5 stars, but something like coconut oil getting half a star because it's, pure fat. It doesn't make any sense.
We are so proud with what we've created with season 1 of The Shift, but there is more to come. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss a thing.
The Shift!
Nutritional or dietary guidelines have been around for decades. The idea is that they help the general public to make healthier choices. But as you might have realised from listening to the episode so far, some of the foods that the science is showing to be disease-causing are right there in the dietary guidelines. Here's cardiologist Dr. William Davis again.
A lot of these guidelines come from the U.S. Dietary Guidelines for Americans. That comes from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and other similar agencies based on poor interpretation of the science, some very bad science, and the influence of industry. The USDA, to their credit, whenever they have to issue dietary guidelines, they open it to public conversation. And they actually have a period of, say, 10 days or so where the entire debate is open to the public. But people like you and me don't attend those meetings in Bethesda, Maryland. It's big industry that does. They pay people to participate in these conversations. So in effect, industry has influenced the message of the USDA, the American Heart Association, the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, the American Diabetes Association, and thereby, unfortunately, much of the dietary policy of the rest of the world, because they listen to these things. Yet it was crafted by industry, not by science.
There's more than enough evidence to show that saturated fat does not cause heart attacks, that sugar is really bad. But why don't you think that it's come through into what we're telling people?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think there is more going on behind the scenes than we could possibly fathom. But what I mean by behind the scenes is the interaction between industry and government decision makers. And I had a really interesting opportunity recently where Jamie Oliver invited some influential food bloggers, in his own words, and I was one of them, which is great, to his headquarters. And he put in front of us, lovely food, which was very nice, but he also put in front of us some really key people from Instagram and from Facebook. And he said to us, the reason I've invited you here is because you are the most influential people when it comes to getting the message out there. And so he's brought these people together because genuinely he believes that the true message can resonate with a true audience, more so than people who have got a bit sick of reading stuff in newspapers and, the message changing day in, day out.
That was UK nutritionist Jenny Tschiesche. It was interesting what she said about the interaction between decision makers and industry. This was a theme that came up over and over again as I spoke with the experts about why this has been allowed to occur. Here's nutritionist Steph Lowe again on our government guidelines and the effect that they have on our health.
I think that our government guidelines have a huge role to play in our health status or our current health status in the West. I feel like there's a lot to be answered for when we look at big food and big pharma. And, it's been the last 5 decades where we were sheep being brainwashed and we didn't actually look to do our own research or investigate why. I know I'm in a bubble being a nutritionist that talks about real food every day, but I still see some really positive changes with people that are no longer just being led down the garden path. We're doing our own research, we're becoming a lot more savvy, and we are questioning what we're being told. So we're going to look back on the low-fat era and just unfortunately, understand how crazy we were to believe that that was ever the answer. But we're not going to look back on the real food era and ever regret the changes that we're making. So it's onwards and upwards from here.
If you're feeling confused at this point, you're not alone. I mean, who are we supposed to listen to? I asked Dr. William Davis where we should look to for the right information.
There's no easy answer, Katherine, except to say that if the American Heart Association said it, ignore it. If the USDA said it, ignore it. In other words, conventional sources of information have proven over and over and over again, over many decades, unreliable. So it means, if they got it right and we're all slender and healthy and didn't take tons of medications, we wouldn't need to have these conversations. But they got it so astoundingly wrong that it's essential that you and I have these kinds of conversations, that your listeners hear these kinds of things, because they can't turn the TV on and get the right message. They can't go to the doctor and get the right message. They have to turn to alternative sources for real information that works.
I would say if you go to, your average supermarket and you look at the statistics and you listen to the news and you read the kind of data, there's a massive, massive sugar problem.
Is there a sugar tax here?
Just starting.
What was the resistance around that?
Our rights to eat what we want when we want it. Have you heard of Jamie Oliver? He's done massive amounts. He's been a crusader and he's had a lot of backlash. And he's just one of those people who doesn't really care about that. He just keeps going because he really believes in it. And in this country, he did TV programs about trying to have some better nutritional foundations and bring down sugar content and that kind of thing. And he had a backlash of parents pushing stuff through the railings at school for their kids because it's their right to give their kids sugar.
Whoa.
Yeah, there's a problem.
From working with thousands of patients, I know that learning doesn't always equate to doing. For some of you, I know that you'll listen and take action right away. But for others, you're going to need a little more help. That's why I've developed my Gut Shift program. Over 12 weeks, I'll take you through what you need to make a shift in your gut health step by step. It's based on the latest clinical research combined with the clinical experience from seeing thousands of patients. Registrations are now open. Go to theshiftclinic.com and click on Shift with Us.
The Shift!
Now, I know that some of you are still wondering, how on earth have I been told to eat something that the science shows can harm me? I wanted to explore why it takes so long for new evidence about health to get into the mainstream circulation. So I asked Steph Lowe what she thought.
I think one of the biggest changes that we've seen more recently is the CEO of the Dietetics Association of Australia severing ties with big food. So most people were surprised to find out when this news article was released that there were ties, but we know that the DAA, so the Dietetics Association of Australia, had major sponsors like Nestle and Kellogg's, and then it's no wonder that we're seeing grains and cow's milk being recommended to the whole of Australia. A new CEO has stepped in, thankfully, is now severing ties with big food. So that's going to obviously, hopefully, change our dietary guidelines. How quickly that happens, I don't know, but I think that's a really big step.
Now, you might be wondering at this point, what is big food? This is a term that's been accepted to describe the big players in our food industry. And no, as you might have guessed, it's not the spinach growers, but rather the biggest industry players in food. This includes large-scale agriculture such as wheat, corn, soy and sugarcane, as well as packaged food giants that make everything from candy to crackers to cookies to pasta to fries to bread. These are big companies with a lot invested in you buying and consuming their food, where profit margins are the main driver, not your health. Interestingly, this is the first I had heard of the Dietitians Association of Australia severing ties with big food, so I did a little digging and found it was indeed true. The influence of big food was so overt that they would hold meetings at the headquarters of Coca-Cola. So can you imagine a heap of people that we're supposed to turn to for health advice meeting at arguably one of the companies that have made us sicker than anyone? If you want to read more, I'll provide a link in the show notes. You'd be getting to know Pedram Shojai by now. He's a doctor of Chinese medicine, an author and a filmmaker. We had a conversation about big foods and their dominance in the US.
In Australia, like, our obesity rates are actually similar and our crappy food is similar, but when you read the labels, the stuff here is just so much worse. So if you're eating, like, let's say, like a cookie in Australia, you've got wheat, you've got sugar, you've got, all the things. But if you're eating one here, you've got like high fructose corn syrup, you've got genetically modified soy, you've got like all these other things in there. So it is something that needs to change fundamentally from farming, food processing, manufacturing, but it needs to come from us.
Yeah, so the ingredients that you mentioned are all subsidized by American taxpayers. So we are actually paying to put that crap in the food, and then we are paying the healthcare dollars to try to heal from the diabetes, the heart disease, and the obesity that comes from the things that we subsidize to put in our food.
It's shocking. And I think it's almost so shocking that some people, like, they just won't believe it. But it actually is the reality, and there's so much evidence. It's really irrefutable that that's what's happening. Interestingly as well, that any doctors that speak out against this stuff, they sort of get blacklisted from the media. It's like, so there's this whole system going on that we don't even know about. So it's kind of really scary.
Well, I mean, listen, if your business is to be the body shop, you like it when it rains. Right? Cars are sliding around and crashing. That's how you make a living, right? And so the incentives of the system are morally bankrupt, and there are too many incentives to keep people sick and to keep the system going. And so we're at a point where, an inflection point in our capitalism, frankly, where we have to decide whether or not this is who we are.
You would have heard throughout the series so far the mention of glyphosate. Actually, I'd say the majority of the people I interviewed had something to say about it. So let's take a look at what glyphosate is and how it's been able to be so pervasive in our food supply. You might have heard of the company Monsanto, so let's look at a bit of history here. Monsanto is the creator of Roundup, a herbicide designed to help keep weeds at bay.
Roundup herbicide by Monsanto. There's never been a herbicide like it before.
Most of you would have come into contact with this product at some point in time. Roundup is based on the chemical glyphosate, which we now know to have a swathe of health detriments.
Glyphosate and the potential dangers of weed killer Roundup is linked to several types of cancers, including breast, prostate, and lung cancers.
Glyphosate was first patented in the US in 1961, not to be used on food, but as a descaling and chelating agent used to remove mineral buildups from things like pipes and boilers. It wasn't until 1970 that glyphosate was discovered to be a herbicide, and it was patented as such. In 1974, Monsanto brought glyphosate to the market as Roundup and sold it as a weed killer.
Applied to actively growing weeds at the proper stage of growth, Roundup translocates down and throughout the entire plant.
In 1982, Monsanto scientists were already working on creating the first genetically modified crops, and as early as 1985, the Environmental Protection Agency classified glyphosate as a Class C carcinogen, meaning that it had suggestive evidence of carcinogenic potential.
Kill weeds and grasses, roots and all, with a shot of Roundup.
Monsanto then tried to persuade the Environmental Protection Agency that this was not actually the case. It wasn't until 1991 that the EPA changed glyphosate to a Class D, meaning evidence of non-carcinogenicity for humans. In 1996, in collaboration with some big agricultural giants, Monsanto released the first genetically engineered glyphosate-tolerant crops. So at this time, glyphosate accounted for just 3.8% of the total volume of herbicide used. By 2007, the EPA reported agricultural use of glyphosate in the range of 180 to 185 million pounds. For over a decade, glyphosate-based herbicides have been, by far, the most heavily used pesticides in the US. Here's where it gets interesting. In 2010, glyphosate was patented in the US by Monsanto as an antibiotic. Yep. That's right, an antibiotic. Obviously, there were some major concerns raised at this point about the potential for glyphosate to affect our gut microbiome, given that it was on so much of the food that we eat.
I do not believe that glyphosate in Argentina is causing increases in cancer. You can drink a whole quart of it and it won't hurt you.
You want to drink some? We have some here.
I'd be happy to, actually, but not really, but...
Not really?
I know it wouldn't hurt me.
If you say so, I have some glyphosate.
No, I'm not stupid.
It wasn't until 2012 that the conversation about the safety of glyphosate really started to heat up. It started with a study that found that rats that consume glyphosate had liver and kidney damage.
Remember that part about glyphosate being downgraded to safe for its cancer-causing potential? Well, in 2015, the World Health Organization's International Agency for Research on Cancer, otherwise known as the IARC, classified glyphosate as a Group 2A carcinogen, which means probably carcinogenic to humans.
Monsanto says the ingredients in Roundup have passed hundreds upon hundreds of safety and health tests around the world, but we were surprised to learn the final product, Roundup itself, has not been tested.
The IARC also concluded that there was strong evidence for genotoxicity, both for straight-up glyphosate and for glyphosate formulations. So how widespread is this actually? Well, in a study in 2016 by the University of California, it was found that glyphosate appeared in 93% of urine samples taken from the US public. This shows just how much society is coming into contact with this harmful chemical.
The unsettling revelation that a well-known weed-killing chemical can be found in popular children's cereals.
It gets worse from here. In 2017, glyphosate was found to cause liver disease in rats. And in 2018, you might have seen the landmark case of Dwayne Johnson's in his case against Monsanto, where it was found that the use of Roundup had caused his non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Monsanto was ordered to pay him $78 million in damages.
A jury in San Francisco found biochemical giant Monsanto liable for former school groundskeeper Dwayne Johnson's cancer. Johnson's lawsuit is the first of hundreds against Monsanto, alleging it knew the weed killer's link to cancer and failed to notify the public.
Now, I know this sounds like a conspiracy theory, but the more I looked into it, the more shocked I was about how corrupt it all seemed. I mean, people are calling Monsanto biopirates and a threat to biodiversity. And it's not surprising, given that this same company has brought us the delightful likes of Agent Orange and DDT. So now we have this harmful chemical that's widespread throughout our food chain, not to mention in our soil and waterways, that's known to disrupt our microbiome, contribute to cancer and damage our organs. It is no surprise we are so sick. And this company has taken such a strong hold on agriculture that it's changed the way that our farmers operate, holding them ransom to having to use their products on their farms. Monsanto was recently bought by Bayer, one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world.
This is truly a historic day for Bayer and for Monsanto.
Now, it's interesting that they've actually chosen not to go forward with the name Monsanto, potentially because of all the bad PR that's associated with it. And now you'll find their products such as Roundup just under their brand names.
Roundup, the herbicide that gets to the root of the problem.
Do you have a question you'd like to see answered? Go to theshiftclinic.com/group, jump in the community and ask us.
The Shift!
Now, the other term you'll hear our experts say is Big Pharma. This refers to the major pharmaceutical companies that manufacture all of the drugs, medical devices and vaccines that are prescribed. Some of what I learnt wasn't new, but other things truly shocked me. Especially because a lot of what was being said about Big Pharma came from very prominent doctors that have had years of medical training and have operated under the conventional medical model for decades. One of these was Dr. William Davis, who I asked about the systemic problems that we have with Big Pharma and health.
So in Australia, it's not this bad. And as you said, we don't have advertising for TV. But also in Australia, there's not a lot of doctors speaking out about stuff. It's very, very frowned upon. I had a colleague of mine who is an integrative doctor, and he said he used to get hate mail from other doctors for practicing nutrition because it was outside of scope of practice. So I feel like there's this systemic problem that comes right back down from the universities and education and what that means. And it's almost like Big Pharma has got right through the system, through education, through the physician, through advertising, through the government as well.
Absolutely. They have deep pockets, right, Katherine? They have billions of dollars to spend on advertising and marketing. So when I was in practice, it would be every day, several sexy, good-looking sales reps would come to the office. And these were model-like, good-looking people with all sorts of promises, right? Dr. Davis, you can have, we'll bring you lunch tomorrow. Do you want to go to dinner? We're going to have a meeting on Friday. Do you want an all-expense-paid trip to Orlando? And you know what? Most of us, and I did it first, most of us take the bait. And you can't help but be subservient to the desires of big pharma. And it's even worse, by the way, in the medical device industry.
How has this happened?
It started because big pharma has a heavy hand in crafting legislation. You know, I don't donate $50,000 to my congressman, but big pharma does. And the hospital industry and the medical device industry does. And so they, in effect, have a great say in how politics is conducted. They have big control over Congress, the Senate, and policy. So big pharma has come to be a dominant force in media. And that's why there's almost no negative reporting on healthcare. There's reporting on healthcare politics, but not on the real systemic problems in healthcare. For instance, there's a drug for hepatitis C, Harvoni, another one called Sovaldi. And if your doctor says, you have hepatitis C, I know it's silent, you have no problems from it, but you have the blood test positive for hepatitis C, here's a prescription. Hands you a prescription, you take it to the pharmacist, he fills it with one vial of 120 tablets, $84,000 for one vial of 120 tablets. No one's heard this because the media are not reporting the huge systemic predatory practices of big pharma and healthcare. That's just one small example of thousands of similar examples where everyday people are being preyed upon for money. That's what healthcare has become. Only the US and New Zealand allow direct consumer drug advertising. So what countries have the highest healthcare costs in the world? The US and New Zealand. In other words, big pharma has found a way to drive revenues. And the horrible thing is that my colleagues, mainstream doctors, have become the unwitting pawns in this game. They deliver this message. You need Humira. You need Enbrel. You need Farxiga. All these ridiculous drugs that are outrageously priced and serve the purposes of big pharma, but not of health.
The chemical industry is very powerful in the U.S.
Here's Dr. Leo Galland.
In the allergy solution, we talk about a study that my son Jonathan, who co-wrote the book with me, came across, looking at the effect of using scented detergents and other additives in a washing machine or in a dryer. And Febreze is one brand in the U.S. So they collected air from the backyards of people who had dryers that vented to the backyard. And they did an experiment where they used scented or non-scented products in cleaning. And where they used the non-scented products, there was hardly anything abnormal. Where they used the scented products, there were hundreds, even thousands of chemicals, some of which are carcinogens, a lot of irritants, a lot of allergens. So I did an interview for a magazine about this. The person who was interviewing me wanted to interview the researcher who had done it. And so we contacted her. Well, she had moved to Australia because the fragrance industry in the US was so powerful that she could not get more funding for her work. Wow. And she went down under to continue her work.
Dr. Felice Gersh is an integrative obstetrician and gynecologist with over 30 years' experience. I asked her about why she chose to look at becoming a functional medicine practitioner when she had worked as a conventional doctor for so long.
I couldn't just let go and not monitor my own patients when they were in labor. So it was either an all or nothing thing for me. So we had a parade of pharmaceutical reps that came through my practice. And I demanded that they show me their original studies that allowed their drug to become FDA approved. And I was shocked with what I actually found. And I said, wow, this is hardly different from placebo. You know, you just made the graph and you blew it up to show a difference. It was really not very significant. Somehow they played with the numbers, it seemed, so it made statistical significance. But in terms of actual day-to-day benefit, it seemed really low, to say the least. And when you look at the side effect profile, it seemed like, well, this is more harm than good.
What kind of drugs are we talking about here?
Things like drugs for bone health, like the bisphosphonates, things for overactive bladder. So you're taking a drug that can give you dementia and constipation and feel terrible so that you go to the bathroom one time less in a day. It's like, this doesn't make any sense. And the more I did a deep dive into what I was prescribing, the more horrified I became. I basically lost my purpose. This is one of the terrible things. Up until 2015, which was just around the corner from where we are now, the NIH, National Institutes of Health in the US, made no requirement to distinguish who the subjects of a study were, whether they were male or female. And what I can tell you is they were always male, because females are complex. So if you do a study with women, you have to know, are they in menopause or not in menopause? Are they on hormone therapy or not? Are they reproductive? Where are they in their cycle? Are they on some form of contraceptive? What if they get pregnant and ruin the whole study, right? So no one wants women in their studies. So all the cardiovascular studies, everything that you know of as a study, they were with men.
What Felice says here is very important because we know that women, due to their unique hormonal system, are at higher risk of many issues such as autoimmune disease and depression. This could mean that a study showing a drug to be safe in men may not necessarily translate to women. Another issue that I wanted to explore was why it took so long for new evidence to become mainstream. I asked Dr. Tom O'Brien what he thought.
I had a great conversation with my mentor, Dr. Jeffrey Bland, and we were talking about that exact concept. How long is it going to take? And the average right now is 17 years from when translational research, meaning cutting-edge research that changes the way you think, before it's implemented in everyday practice. It's 17 years. And that's sad for me. It's common knowledge now about intestinal permeability. Any doctor that says there's no such thing is just referring to what would now be archaic literature. And they haven't had an opportunity to read the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of studies.
Mainstream medical doctors are highly educated and knowledgeable people. However, if they're not getting the latest evidence, how can they make the best decision for you? This is Kale Bock, journalist and producer of The Gut Movie.
I mean, we've known since 1998 that antibiotics shouldn't be used for ear infections when the British Medical Journal brought that out. And yet still here in Australia, we're prescribing antibiotics up to 9 times the recommended amount for ARIs, acute respiratory infections, and we're still using them for ear infections as well. It's nuts. So you can use the excuse that, yeah, it takes 17 years for people to get the research, but it shouldn't. It shouldn't take 17 years. And I think that's a result of where the funding is coming from in terms of our education systems. And I'm lucky as a journalist I can point these things out without getting in trouble. Our pharmaceutical industry has too much influence on the sort of health information that our practitioners receive, and then subsequently the recommendations that we receive, the public. So we need to change that. And it is changing slowly as we develop more awareness about how the system works. And I think people are rejecting it. The mainstream is distracted. That's the biggest thing. The mainstream is so susceptible to distraction. We're more interested in the feminist marches than what's going on with the overuse of antibiotics. And both might have a case for being in the media, but I think the media is used very strategically by big industry to actually create a story that keeps us disempowered when it comes to our own health and well-being. And if we think about it, what's most important in life? Your health and wellness has got to be at the top, because without it, you can't do a thing, right? So that really should be at the top. However, we've been indoctrinated into a system where the priorities have shifted. The priorities are, I've got to go and earn money. I've got to pay my taxes. I think that we need to step back from our day-to-day processes and actually go, hey, what's important? What am I being told and why am I being told it? How do I actually start to engage with resources that are going to benefit me and feed me information that's unbiased and actually helpful and relevant to my existence?
You might remember neurologist Dr. David Perlmutter from earlier in the series. I asked David where we should be getting our information from.
I think it's important to look at what independent people are saying. I was recently on a national program here in the States, and with the introduction of me in the morning, they said, Dr. Perlmutter's on our program today. He's just revised his Grain Brain book after 5 years. But before they cut to me, she said, and Grain Brain, of course, focused on the dangers of high sugar in the diet in terms of the brain. So before they cut to me, she said, but we reached out to the sugar industry for a comment, and they said that sugar is okay in moderation, as decades of research have shown. And again, of course, it's in their interest to tell you that genetically modified seeds are a good thing, that glyphosate poses no risk, and that eating lots of sugar is okay for you. My response to them was, it's like a couple of decades ago when the tobacco industry was telling us that cigarettes were harmless and probably good for us. You can't listen to the people who have an interest in making these statements and trying to shore up the sense that their products are good for us.
Season 2 of The Shift is currently in production and it is going to be huge. In Season 2, we turn our attention to moods and emotions. Mental health issues are massive and there is going to be so much that we cover. Be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss out.
The Shift!
Now, at this point, I want to talk about Pete Evans. In Australia, he's one of the biggest health advocates, and a lot of you would know of him as the paleo guy. What I have observed is that the media love to hate Pete. He can evoke very strong reactions from people. He recently produced a film called The Magic Pill, where he looked at using a traditional hunter-gatherer diet both in Indigenous communities and also in some very unwell Americans. The film included world experts like Dr. David Perlmutter, who is featured on The Shift, and focused on using a ketogenic diet for healing. However, it copped some negative media, including the head of the Australian Medical Association condemning it for being quote-unquote dangerous. What I was curious about was why there doesn't seem to be a lot of conversation, just this reactive, this is wrong and we don't like it type of response to anything that falls outside of the dietary guidelines. I asked Pete Evans, why do people feel so challenged by this?
I think it depends on, again, the belief system of the person and how is this challenging them. So, for instance, we talk about the AMA, the Australian Medical Association. Not once in the film did I point out the AMA or any medical association. Yet the president of the AMA thought it would be wise, as the head of an industry for doctors, to come out and to say that Pete Evans is dangerous and that his film is misleading and can hurt people. And I've been around for a while and I look at that type of thing and, not the cynic in me, but the observer in me looks at that and says, okay, well, if they have a concern that what I'm presenting here, and it's not me, it's the people I interview are getting long-term sustainable health results, not only for themselves, but for their patients. So these people that I interview that have spent their lifetime trying to figure it out, and at this particular point in time, this is their best information that they're sharing. And it could change in 5, 10, 15 years' time, and I hope it does. I hope it keeps evolving so we learn more. So my observation of somebody like the president of the AMA is that if you believe that what I am sharing is hazardous or dangerous, prove it. Give me one example of somebody that embraces organic meat, wild-caught seafood, some beautiful organic vegetables, and includes that in their diet and has fallen sicker or become more ill because of that. They still haven't been able to do that.
We have to be pragmatic here and realise that the pharmaceutical industry is an industry and therefore is trying to make money. In 2014, worldwide pharmaceutical revenues exceeded $1 trillion. $1 trillion is $1,000 billion by US calculations. I mentioned earlier that in Australia, we're fortunate not to have direct-to-consumer advertising for drugs. However, in the US, it's happening a lot. The question is, how many people are taking drugs that they don't need because of this? You might remember some of this conversation from episode 7, but I thought it was worth repeating here. I asked Rodney Dietert if it fixes the health problem or adds to it.
Well, my personal impression is, for when I've watched primetime TV, that the primary advertisers are pharmaceuticals, actually. So you get the whole range of things. A lot of them are for immune-driven and metabolic diseases. Most of them are psoriasis or diabetes, arthritis, obviously blood pressure. And I have to say, one of my bones to pick with what we have called chronic diseases or non-communicable diseases is that we don't cure them, largely. We manage. And I think in my book, The Human Superorganism, I talk about the fact that you manage them, but we know that one non-communicable disease, or NCD, they're abbreviated, begets others as you age. You can expect, when you get to my age, in the 60s, to have 2 or 3. And there are always medications that are medically coded with those diseases, so you're adding medications. And they all have side effects, so you're adding risk of side effects every time you do that. And you become dependent on these. So, all you have to do is ask the question, for patients prescribed statins, what is the physician's plan to remove them from statins?
And they don't have one.
No, that's not a good pattern.
So you have this pattern where people get one NCD and then they're put on a drug, and they get another NCD and they're put on another drug, or they're put on another drug because of the side effect of one of their drugs. How has this happened? Well, it's happened because, and again, I'm not saying that everybody's been irresponsible, but everybody has been like a thoroughbred horse with blinders on. So it's all narrow context. So a physician sees a patient. I'm not an MD, by the way, so this is my personal observations. Physician sees a patient and they're presenting symptoms. There's something to be dealt with, and the physician will react to those symptoms. But we need to treat for lifetime planning, not today's symptom. And that is where we can change the culture. And that's where naturopaths and all healthcare providers have an incredibly useful role to play.
There's some pretty shocking truth bombs in this episode, but it is something that we really need to consider if we want to turn our health around. There's been a lot of food for thought, but we're not done yet. In part 2 of this episode, we're going to take a deeper look at the conventional medical system and see what some of our medical experts have to say about it.
Coming up on The Shift.
It's just like me as a practitioner, they can only say what they're allowed to say.
I had a lot of doctors say to me, I don't believe in this. I'm like, I'm sorry, are we at church?
Everybody's looking for the life jacket to stay afloat in the pond of diabetes or in the pond of recurrent miscarriages.
They'd rather go and get some medication, or they'd rather just accept that they can't do it, but they can do stuff about it. And I think that's so important. But it is a bit of a slog.
By now, you might be beginning to wonder what the health of your gut is like. To find out more, take our free online assessment at theshiftclinic.com/quiz. It only takes 5 minutes and you'll get a great report with some suggestions to get you started.
The Shift!
This series is produced by Must Amplify. Hosted by Katherine Maslen. Executive producer Ronsley Vaz. Music and sound design by Shade Furlong. Thank you to all of our experts. For more details on them, go to theshiftclinic.com/gut.
Still listening? Join the conversation about gut health at theshiftclinic.com/group.
The Shift!
Thank you for listening.
Every listen or download of this show
and hence this voice
directly funds the ending of sex
and human trafficking.
A voice for a voice.
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 Find out more at amplify.impacts.com.